This version of the Liebherr LTM 1350 comes in the standard Liebherr branded box. It's got some nice photos of the real crane, but sadly there's no technical information about it. This particular model is a limited edition version in the colours of Emil Egger, and Egger is a Swiss logistics company. Inside the box there is a reasonable assembly manual, and although it shows the fixed lattice jib, that's not included with this model. Also, the biggest omission of the manual is that there's no reeving diagrams for the hooks. It is tightly factory sealed all round, so we start with a little bit of surgery. And just like a patient in a hospital, we can open it up and see what's inside. The earlier versions of this model did have a number of quality control problems, but there was only one issue on the review model, and that's a broken steering linkage. So once again it's time for a visit by our old friend Sue Perglue. Thankfully Sue does her work and it's an easy fix. The problem was actually caused by careless gluing at the joints, so with that freed up, the axle worked properly. For the initial assembly we'll get it ready for the road, and the first thing you can see is that the winch drum doesn't have much friction, so it probably won't support a heavy load unless you wedge it. At the boom head there's a tying off point which is bolted on, so we'll take that off using the provided tools. And by putting a knot in the thread and feeding it in the slot, you get a realistic way of tying off the hoist rope. There's a thread loop at the front, but I don't like that, so I'll cut it off and attach the hook directly. Only one more job to do to get the crane ready for the road, and that's to fit the handrails. These ones look a bit strange, but in fact they're modelled to represent the folded handrails of the real crane, and they're folded to reduce the headroom whilst travelling. With the crane all set for the road, it can now drive off to the next part of the review. In we go to the inspection pit so we can look underneath, and the detail's great. All of the transmission and suspension elements are modelled in high detail, and there are plenty of hoses which run through the chassis to various tanks. The tyres on the wheels have got a good tread pattern, and they're mounted on wheels which are different for driven and non-driven axles. Also it's great to see the Michelin name in the sidewalls. At the front the driving cab looks realistic and there's good interior detail as well. And behind the cab the casting detail is very good and the mesh grille is top notch. Around the body the look is really enhanced by the use of tiny warning graphics. And the high detail continues on the Outrigger beams and pads with more tiny graphics. The crane cab has got metal grab rails on the outside and the Liebherr name on the seat back. Up on top the luffing gear is already reeved in the factory and there's a nice chrome exhaust. Getting down to the small stuff, there's also a tiny opening flap on an auxiliary winch. A standout aspect is the main boom ram, which has a metal jacket. A nice detail on the boom is the rotating pulleys. And there's some extra detail you can add to the boom because these parts are included in the box. The Y-guy arrangement on the boom is metal and it's very detailed, with only the plastic ram jackets being slightly off colour. The guying attachment at the boom top has some plastic parts, but the pulleys are all metal. And there's also an extra part that you can add on if you want, and that's for a single line hook. There isn't a single line hook in the box, but two are supplied and this is the bigger one. And they're very well made and detailed metal parts. A telescopic crane can extend its boom, but how does it do it? Well, into the high-tech Cranes etc. labs, and here we have a schematic of the ram that's inside the boom. And the telescoping starts by pushing up the first section to the amount that's required. At that point the section locks in place, and then the telescoping ram disconnects and retracts. The cycle is then repeated as it locks into the next section and pushes it up. Starting underneath, the model engineering is very good because each of the axle pairs has independently sprung suspension, and the crane rolls reasonably well in a straight line, although sometimes an axle might jump out of line because of the steering mechanism being loose. In fact, each of the axles does steer with a reasonable range of movement, And because all of the axles are independent, you can set any steering mode that you want. And again, if you're careful, it will roll along maintaining the steering. Having steered our way to site, we'll set up the crane, so the first thing to do is to pull out the outrigger beam. And the pads are really nice because they're hooked in to keep them under the crane during transport. And when they're pulled out of the lock, they can be twisted to lower them. That gives you a nice smooth faced piston, and spreader plates are also included with the model. Finally, you can install small locking pins which keep the piston central on the pad. A good feature is that the outriggers will support the crane wheels free. As the crane is now on site, we can make the model look right by swapping the handrails for some that are erected. And we can release the hook and set about raising the boom. It raises very smoothly and easily, and that's because the ram has got a positive locking system. An Allen key is provided, and that's used on a grub screw, and by turning it you can tighten it onto the piston. It's a good system and it works well, and with the boom up we can play crane driver and lower the hook. While we're in the driving seat, we may as well look at the cab, and there's a little walkway that can be pulled out underneath. And it also tilts to allow the operator to be comfortable when he's looking up high. The crane can of course be rotated, but it looks like this particular operator has got no control of his hook. Extending the fin profile section booms is nice and easy, and they lock in place at full extension using a fairly typical locking pin system. And to close up the boom, it's just the usual reverse process: press in the locking pin and close up the telescope. To do any proper lifting, we need to attach some counterweight at the back of the crane, so it's over to the high speed cranes etc. experts. The real crane should turn around hydraulically to pick up its counterweight, but on the model you have to fix it by hand and then use a finger shaped like a screwdriver to get the pins in. And here we're using the famous Cranes etc. patented method of using a bit of blue tack on the end of the screwdriver. The tolerances of the model engineering are all very good, and once the counterweight's attached it smoothly rotates over the carrier of the crane. To increase the lifting capacity of the crane we can attach the Y-guy arrangement, and that consists of two separate pieces which bolt into place, and you use the tools with tiny nuts and bolts. Then the guy rod on the Y-guy arrangement is attached to the guy rod on the boom, again with a nut and bolt, and the last connection to make is at the boom head. Here there's a plastic swivelling piece which bolts to the boom head, and the other end bolts to the pulley assembly on the Y-guy arrangement. With both sides of the Y-guy attached and bolted up, you can then put them into a transport position. At this point you do have to be a bit careful with the model because the parts are delicate, but if you are careful you can position the guy rods and the Y-guy arrangement properly on the crane. Let's now set the crane up, including the Y-guy. To release or tension up the guy ropes you use a key in the winch at the end of the Y-guy beam, and it's very stiff because there's some kind of ratchet inside, but that does mean you can hold a high tension on the rope. To set the crane up though is quite laborious because you have to incrementally adjust the Y-guy for every boom extension. But as shown here, once the boom is extended a bit you can open up the Y-guy, and then you can see how the system provides more support to the boom head and therefore allows the capacity of the crane to be increased. Certainly it's complex, but it does look great. Once the boom is fully telescoped, a big model results, so let's get the tape measure out. And to the top it's about 56 inches or 142 centimetres. So this is a big and impressive crane model. The detailing and features are really very good, and this version of the model was certainly better quality than previous ones. It's a very attractive model in the colours of Emil, and overall that makes it outstanding.